Law number 18 of the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership, law number 18 is the law of sacrifice. And the law of sacrifice says that a leader must give up to go up. This is a great law. By the way, when I talk and teach this law is opposite of the philosophy of the world. The philosophy of the world is that as you grow as a leader, you get perks and privileges. And this law, we're going to find out that if you really want to be a servant leader, you have to give up to go up. Now, I did a lecture one time, and I haven't been able to do it very many times, but I did a lecture one time on how to get to the top of the mountain. And I'll give you the little outline because it really works. It'll work for you. It'll work for your people. It works for me. If you want to get to the top of the mountain, the first thing you have to do is you have to get up to go up. Does that make sense? Now, the reason I say that, you say, well, John, I think that's a little obvious. Do you think you had to say that? Yes, I do. You don't know how many people I've run into who think that there's an escalator that takes them to the top. You don't know how many people I run into who are waiting on the elevator to come down and pick them up and take them to the top. So what I've learned is if you really want to get to the top, the first thing you got to do is you got to get up to go up. But you not only have to get up to go up, secondly, you have to grow up to go up. You see, if you're going to climb the mountain, you got to grow up. You got to get mature. You got to quit living for self. You got to understand the whole process. You've got to develop yourself. And what's wonderful is that you can grow up to go up. You can grow up to be a leader. You can grow up to a whole new level. I love the story of a guide who unsuccessfully tried to take his team up to the top of Mount Everest. They didn't make it. A storm drove them back down. And he said when they got to the bottom, they were very discouraged because they had come from all over parts of the world, and this was their goal to get to the top, and they didn't get to the top. So he said, let's have one meal together in the lodge before we go home. And that night, they gathered together, and he said the morale was pretty low. And finally, he got up to speak to them, and as he got up to speak to them about what they had tried and the whole process, behind him on the wall in the lodge was a picture of Mount Everest, this great, giant mountain. And while he was speaking to them, all of a sudden, he turned to the mountain, and here's what he said. He said, Mount Everest, you defeated us this year. We did not get to the top. We wanted to get there. We did not get to the top. But Mount Everest, we have news for you. We're coming back. And Mount Everest, not are we coming back, but next time we try, we're going to get to the top, and I'm going to tell you why, Mount Everest, we're going to get to your top. You see, Mount Everest, you're as big as you're ever going to get. But we can keep on growing. Oh, don't you love it? You got to grow up to go to the top. So you got to get up to go up. You got to grow up to go up. Oh, this is so good. Let me tell you something else. You got to gather up to go up. In other words, you got to get a team. You don't climb Mount Everest all by yourself. Isn't that true? If you're going to climb Mount Everest, you got to get the team. You got to gather them up. You got to say, come on, folks, let's get to the top. You got to develop a team. So you got to gather up to go up clear to the top. And then lastly, you have to give up to go up. Can I tell you something about mountain climbing? When you climb the mountain, you don't try to take a bunch of stuff with you. You don't get down in the base camp and back up a U-Haul and say, load it up. We're going to go to the top. No. What you do when you climb the mountain is you figure out, what can I do without? I talked to a fellow recently who climbed Mount Rainier, and he said literally the last day of the climb, when they had one more section to go, he said literally at that camp, they left their pup tent, they left it all. He said, and the guide said, to get to the rest of the way, you can't take anything with you. We just got to go by ourselves to make it to the top. You got to give up to go up. And that's what this is all about. This is a fact that you and I, if we're going to be leaders, we have to understand that there are some things that we're going to have to give up in our life. We're going to have to sacrifice. There is no success without sacrifice. In fact, if you have success and did not sacrifice, it's because someone before you already has sacrificed. And if you sacrifice and you don't see success, someone behind you will climb on your shoulders and they will see success. Does that make sense? I saw recently, it was on 60 Minutes. This was probably within the last year. Mike Wallace was interviewing a mountain climber. Perhaps you'll remember this incident. It was probably maybe a year and a half ago that a group of mountain climbers tried to take people up to the top, of which they not only didn't make it to the top, but a few of them died in the storm. And 60 Minutes was interviewing, Mike Wallace was interviewing, and it was very interesting because as he was talking to the mountain climber, he asked this question. He said, well, let me ask you, as a mountain climber, if you wouldn't have had those other people with you, he said, could you have gotten to the top? Or at least as a mountain climber, if you wouldn't have had those other people with you, could you have survived the storm? And the mountain climber very quickly said, well, he said, first of all, if we wouldn't have had the other people with us, we could have probably gotten to the top. But number two, he said, yes, he said, I'm sure we could have all survived the storm. As far as the mountain climbers, we could have all lived if we didn't have other people with us. But then he told Mike Wallace, but he said, Mr. Wallace, you don't understand the purpose of a mountain climber. The purpose of the guides like us is, our whole purpose is to take people with us to the top. He said, that's the challenge. He said, that's the joy. That's what we get paid for. We don't get paid to get to the top ourselves. He said, we're the professional guides. We get paid to take people to the top. And when I heard that, I thought, isn't that true about leadership? What we get paid for is we get paid to take people to the top of the mountain with us. And then I love this because Mike Wallace said, well, let me ask you another question. He said, your job is so dangerous. You take risk and you have potential of losing your life, and you got the storms and the weather and the rough rocks. And so Mike Wallace went through all the hazards of the job, and he said, do you really think that it's worth it to go through all of that to get to the top of the mountain? And the guide said, Mr. Wallace, it's obvious to me that you've never been to the top of the mountain. Don't you love it? It's obvious to me you've never been to the top of the mountain. I want to tell you something. The greatest joy you have as a leader is not only going to the top of the mountain yourself, but taking people with you. Oh, there's no greater joy than that. So this whole law of sacrifice says that if I'm going to be the leader I need to be, I need to give up to go up. That's why I have the leadership pyramid right here for you. You see, the leadership pyramid almost says it all. Look at it with me. You see, once you get in the organization and you're at the bottom of the pyramid, you can go to the left or you can go to the right. You have all kind of options. But do you notice the higher that you go, the less options that you have? By the time you're at the top of the pyramid, you can't go to the left or to the right. Why? Because you've given up your rights. Now, this is a true picture of a spiritual, godly leader. In other words, we're not at the top of the church to have rights. We're there to give it up. And let me say this. This is a huge problem in the church. Too many churches are nothing more than country clubs with crosses on top. Too many churches, what we've got is we've got leaders at the top, and they're kind of like the Pope. They got all kind of privileges and ranks, and whoa, it gets pretty good. And you can't do that. But now, what I love about this illustration here that you have in your notes is this law, the law of sacrifice, will take the politics out of people. If you really want to get done politicking in your congregation or your business, then what you do is you say, well, you know what, let me tell you how this works. If you get to the top, you lose all of your rights. Now all of a sudden, you're going to purify all the motives. People who aspire to leadership now, they're not aspiring to leadership because they get perks. They're aspiring to leadership because they want to serve people. Wow. I've given you a lot of Hillham illustrations, but in that time when we were growing, we not only filled up that little country church, and we gave up our seats and let the other people sit down, but our parking lot got full out there. And so they said, what are we going to do? I mean, the parking lot, now when I say it got full, it was a little parking lot. Remember, we're in Hillham, okay? 35 cars was all you could put out there. So they said, John, what are you going to do? Well, I said, the only way I can think is that we who are leaders are going to have to park our car somewhere else. Whoa. We need to park down the country road and walk to church. In fact, I said, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll make it so that when you join the church, in fact, we had 2 questions on our membership questionnaire. One is, do you know Jesus Christ as personal Savior? And number 2 is, will you park your car somewhere else? And you had to answer yes to one of those questions. Anyway. It was a wonderful time in the life of Hillham when I began to teach the leaders that as leaders, we give it up first. Now, that you say, John, where did you ever get this idea, this law of sacrifice thing? Well, Jesus. If he were here teaching leadership, you know what he would be teaching? He'd be teaching us that leadership is servanthood. And I have found that this is the great protector of wrong motives. When a person gets a leadership position and they realize what they're giving up to have that leadership position, then if they seek it, you know that they have the right heart. Now, this principle, you got to give up to go up. I've lived with this principle all of my life. There are so many areas that I could illustrate it in. When I wanted to start my nonprofit organization, Equip, one of the reasons I waited for the time that I waited to start it is because I knew that I needed to get my other organizations financially solid. Because I knew that in a nonprofit organization, it gets financially hurting for a while, and I knew that I was going to be able to have a feeder. I was going to have a financial line to make sure that the Equip ministry could really be blessed. And so for the last 2 or 3 years, we've been able to put hundreds of thousands of dollars in Equip, but I knew that I needed to wait until the time was right on this. Now, what I'm saying to you is that in the process of the law of sacrifice, what leaders understand is this. Now hang on. Here we go. Hang on. We have a choice. We can either pay now and play later, or we can play now and pay later. But read my lips. You will pay. There is no such thing as a free lunch. You will pay. The question is not will you pay. The question is when will you pay? And here's the way this works. If you pay on the front end, you can play on the back end. In other words, if you sacrifice on the front end, then you can have the business, the ministry, the thing that you're really wanting, and at the end of life, you can enjoy the fruit of it. See, if you pay on the front end, you can play on the back end. But if you decide you'd rather play on the front end, that's your choice. And by the way, you can do that. You can just play, goof off. Not sacrifice. You can play on the front end, but I want to tell you something. You'll pay on the back end. I remember I was giving this lecture one day, and Bill, you'll remember, because I was talking about the pay now, play later, or play now and pay later principle. And Bill looked at me and said, John, here's the way this works. If you pay on the back end, the payment compounds and the interest is greater. In other words, the longer you wait to pay, the more you pay. And the law of sacrifice says, look at your life, settle these issues, learn to sacrifice. You got to give up to go up, do it on the front end, and the return will be yours. So let me give you 3 sacrifice statements. Number 1, There is no success without sacrifice. Just understand that. The price of success is always sacrifice. Don't look at people that have been successful and say, well, they're just lucky. No, they're not lucky. Don't get this lottery mindset, I'm waiting for my lotto number to come up. Understand that to reap, you've got to sow. And understand that you've got to pay on the front end, and there is no success without sacrifice. Number 2, the higher the level of leadership, the greater the sacrifice. Now, this one surprises people. Here's what I mean. The higher you go up in your leadership, the tougher it is to pay the price, and the sacrifice becomes greater. Let me illustrate this way. If I'm down at the bottom, if I'm down at the bottom and I want to start climbing the mountain, when I start off with nothing, what do I give up? Nothing. But it's okay because I don't have anything. So I said, wow, this isn't bad at all. Yeah, well, good. I'm up another level. And now I get to this level, there's another price. Remember, there's a price at every level. And the question is, will you pay it? And so I get to this level. I said, well, I got a little to give up, but I just don't have a lot to give up. I just got started. So I go up here and I said, well, this is good. I like this. And so, but now what I want you to see is the higher you go, the greater the price becomes. So when you're up here, hey, when you decide you want to go from this level up to the next level, can I tell you something? By the time you're getting close to the top, there are some huge prices that you got to pay. It's kind of like this. Did you ever go to an auction? When they start the bidding, everybody jumps in. Huh? Everybody, yeah, oh sure, I'll bid that. Yep, I'll bid that. But can I tell you something? The higher you go, the less hands that are in the air. It thins the crowd out real quick. By the time you get to the top, huge price. A couple of years ago, I did an Enjoy Life Club tape that would have to rank, in my mind, of one of the 10 best Enjoy Life Club leadership tapes I've ever done. It was a tape called 10 Trade-Offs Usually Worth Making. And the whole lesson was about the fact that if you're going to climb, if you're going to be successful in life, if you're going to be a leader, that you're going to have to constantly make these trade-offs. And basically the thesis was that every time you have to make a trade-off, you have to give up something to go to another level. It goes back to the statement of Emerson that said, for everything you gain, you must lose something. So what happens is, as we go up, we don't accumulate, we just trade off. And on this tape, the reason I did it is because I had just finished resigning my church in Skyline, and people said, John, why would you leave this church? And it was a great church. They paid me very well. It was a church that had a national reputation. I had them really mentored and trained and developed, and I could do the national ministry. I could do the local church ministry. People said, why would you leave San Diego? Beautiful place, right on the ocean. Everybody in the city knows you. I couldn't walk into any establishment in the city of San Diego without people knowing who I was. Why would you leave all that and just do the national ministry and move to another city and almost kind of like start all over? Good night, John. You don't need to do that. You could stay right there and build on what God had given you. And I could have. But here's what I knew. The level that I wanted to go with the Enjoy group, I'd have to give up to go up. I'd have to make some trade-offs. I would have to trade off success for significance. Wow. I remember in my early years, I had to make a trade-off. In my early years, I had to trade affirmation for accomplishment. You see, you just got to look at these trade-offs. You got to look at yourself and say, whoa, if I'm going to get to the next level, I'm going to have to give up something. And many people never go to the next level because the price gets too high. You don't go to the next level not because you lack the ability. You don't go to the next level because the price gets too high. And let me tell you something. When does a church stop growing? A church stops growing when the price gets too high. It's always a price issue. Now, I'm not talking about money. It may not be money at all. It may be the fact that you've got to go from one service to two services, and your people say, well, I don't want to go from one service to two services. I want to stay in this service because I know everybody, and we've got Joe and Sally here. We want to stay as one happy family. We don't want to pay that price. In other words, when you're unwilling to pay the price, the church stops growing. I did a lecture many years ago called Cheap Growth or Inexpensive Growth versus Expensive Growth. And the whole lecture, it was a 2-hour lecture, which basically said there are some growth that you get in your organization that is inexpensive, and there's some growth that gets expensive. For example, if you go to a church and it's only half full, you can fill it up and it's not going to cost much. Isn't that right? You still got the same lights, you got the same door, you got the same building, and all of a sudden that's called cheap growth. But there comes a time when if you're going to keep growing, you got to buy some land and build a building. Now all of a sudden we're in expensive growth. Do you see this? It's like the old story, I love that, of the fleas in the jar. And they don't jump out of the jar. And you say, why don't the fleas jump out of the jar? I'll tell you why the fleas don't jump in the jar, because when they put the fleas in the jar, they put a lid on it. Those fleas down at the bottom of the jar, they thought, well, I don't want to stay down here. I want to get out of here. So they started jumping. Of course, every time they jumped, they smashed their flea brain up against the lid of the jar. And I don't personally think that fleas are probably the smartest insects in the world, but I can tell you right now, you do that for a while, it can hurt. And after a while, those old fleas, they go, oh, that feels a lot better. Now, you know, when they only jump this high and they no longer try to get out, you know what the guy does? He takes the lid off. You don't need the lid. The fleas now have become a prisoner of their own selves. You never need to lock them in again. You never need to have a lid in anymore. You don't need to put the bars in their life. They literally, the rest of their life, have become a prisoner of themselves. Can I tell you something? There are all kind of pastors. They went into the first church. They were idealistic. They were excited about their first ministry. They just came out of college. They weren't trained correctly. They didn't have a clue. And they went to the first church and said, I'm going to build a great work for God. So they get, you know what they do when they get in the first church? They start jumping. This is what happens to them. They start smashing their ministerial brains on the lid of the I won't change movement. And after a while they say, oh my God, that feels so much better. And they learn that if they only jump 4 inches instead of 5, they don't hurt themselves. Here's what's sad. The rest of their life, they go from church A to church B to church C to church D. The rest of their life, they jump 4 inches and never reach their potential. Never, ever become what God intends them to become because they don't want the pain. They say things like, wow, I'm never going to do that again. I learned my lesson back there. Boy, tried that. Oh, tried that one. Never. I'm not touching. I'm not going there. And they don't. And they never reach their potential. Wow. Mark Twain said, if a cat sits on a hot stove, that cat won't sit on a hot stove again. Mark also said that cat won't sit on a cold stove either. That cat just don't like stoves. Wow. The law of sacrifice says if we're going to lead, there's a price that we pay. I know all kind of young potential men and women leaders who are standing in the leadership line. They say, let me lead, let me lead. And what I want to tell them before they decide that, you have to understand, you will pay a price. As you should, as I should. And by the way, that's good because that thins out all of the fake leaders. Gets rid of all the dross and all that stuff we don't want around anyway. So we can have real leaders leading people. Number 3, you have to give up to stay up. In other words, never think the sacrifice stops. Never think that when you get to the top of the mountain, now you can build your vacation home. Never think that it's over. Can I tell you something? It's never over. And if you want to stay up on top, you got to keep giving up. In fact, I love the expression that says, what got you there won't keep you there. And the greatest threat to tomorrow's success is today's success. How many times I've seen it. Somebody gets successful today, say, oh, I love this, let's take a picture of it, let's frame it, let's never let it change. Trust me, it'll change. Why do champions seldom repeat? Because they don't want to pay the price the next year that they paid the last year to get to become champions. So what do? The second year, instead of becoming champions, that next year after they win the championship, they go on the banquet circuit and they go around giving talks about how they did it. And forgetting to work out and forgetting to practice and forgetting the disciplines that got them there. So what the good news is, by the end of the second year, they're good at eating chicken, but they don't get another championship. 3 questions. What is my next level of growth that I must climb and conquer? What will I have to give up? And by the way, let me stop here for a moment. The Bible tells us it's good to count the cost before we enter in. Read that passage in Luke that talks about before you go to war, you've got to look at what you've got as far as how much the enemy has and how much you have. Before you build a tower, you've got to have to figure out the cost of the lumber. So there's nothing wrong with looking at the cost before you launch in, but there will be a price. And then question number 3, which is the big question, am I willing to do it? And then there's a place for you to evaluate your mastery of the law of sacrifice.